Hello everyone, this is Faith at Faith and Books. How are you doing? I am here to talk about Cymbeline by Shakespeare. So I read this for Shake-Tember. It's not part of the prompts or anything, but because of Shake-Tember, I do like to read at least one Shakespeare play in the month of September. I decided on Cymbeline because I was inspired by Emma Stewart of The Bookish Princess. She is writing and self-publishing a series of books about her kitten. She found this stray kitten and she named the kitten Cymbeline. And I thought, Cymbeline, that's one Shakespeare play I really don't, there's many Shakespeare plays that I don't know about, but I thought, oh, maybe I'll give this one a try. So I did. So a couple of things about this. First of all, this is called a tragedy, but it has a happy ending. It's not tragic. The only people that die in it are the bad ones that you want to get rid of anyway. And the closing scene, everything gets tied up very nicely, and the lovers are reunited, and the long-lost children are reunited with their father, and people forgive each other. And so it's actually quite a warm-hearted ending. And I think it's kind of funny that it's called a tragedy. Now, it's not really comedic at all, except there's one scene that is. But that's it. So it's like Shakespeare took all these different tropes that he used in different tragedies and put them in this one with a little twist on each. So, yeah, and the other thing I want to mention before I start talking about the actual plot is that in this edition, which is the Oxford World's Classics, they call one of the main characters Inogen instead of Imogen. So if you look up Cymbeline on the internet and you Google for the characters, one of the main, really almost the main character is Imogen, I-M-O-G-E-N. But in this one, they say, no, it's actually Inogen. So can you see that? Which so confused me, but they have a whole, at the end of this edition, they have a whole reason why they say that it was probably Inogen. And then there was a mistake. So Imogen is the mistake. That's the name that's sort of come down to us. So anyway, so that was unusual. But the plot, so it starts out, Cymbeline is the king. He's a British king. He's married to his second wife, this queen. His first wife died, and he had 3 children by her. One daughter, Imogen, and then he had 2 sons that went missing when they were like 2 and 3 years old and were presumed dead. So he just has this one daughter. His first wife dies. He marries again, this queen, and her son is Cloten. And it's got this theme where the Cymbeline is just being guided by this queen who is evil, kind of like Lady Macbeth a bit. And she's obviously got lots of evil machinations going on. And her son Cloten, they wanted Inogen to marry Cloten. But she despises Cloten, and instead she married this guy whose name is Posthumus Leonatus. So he's called Posthumus because his father died before he was born, and then his mother died in childbirth. So anyway, he's of low birth, but he grew up in the court, and Inogen and he fell in love, and so they get secretly married. And when Cymbeline and the queen find out, they're really mad, and they banish Posthumus. And they're hoping that Inogen will leave him and marry Cloten. They haven't given up yet. So anyway, so at the very beginning, Posthumus leaves Inogen, and they exchange. He gives Inogen a bracelet, and she gives him a ring. And then he goes off, and he's going to Rome. And this is kind of a weird mashup of Italian, Renaissance Italy and Roman times. So that's sort of a mashup too, just the setting. And then they're in Britain, ancient Britain, and then it moves to, what's the name of the place? in some place in Wales too. So so it has a little bit of King Lear in there too, where they move off to Wales, where the final action. There's people living in a cave that happens in King Lear. There's some people who are hiding out in the countryside, and they live in a cave in Wales. And so, so I think the major theme of this play, or one of the one that jumped out to me, was the idea of people being born to having a royal blood, or being naturally of an upper class, I don't know, culture, being somehow innately better because you're born into a royal family, versus the lowborn who don't have whatever element it is you need to be a ruler or leader. And it's very ironic and what's the word I want? Ambiguous, because Cymbeline's the king, and yet he's been duped by this queen, and she's evil, and the son is not a good person either, and yet he's letting them be his guide, and they're all royal. And then Posthumus, everybody says that he's great, but he never does anything particularly great, except I think at one point he fights really well. But he actually does some really awful things, and then he regrets that he's done awful things. And then at the very end, Shakespeare has him do one last awful thing, and we're all supposed to forgive him. So he is of low birth, but everybody talks about how great he is. So, or at least Imogen and his other people too, other lords and people. And then one of the characters is a Pisanio, who is Posthumus's faithful servant. And he's he's just a servant class, but he's kind of the one who's the smartest and who handles all the crazy things going on the best. So he's sort of the best judgment and the best ideas, but he's low birth. So it just plays with that. And then there's another element. So the two sons that went missing actually had been kidnapped by a guy who had been unwrongfully banished from the kingdom. And he is raising them in this cave in Wales. And he raises them as his son. So they think that he's their father. And they've been growing up in a cave where they just hunt and, keep each other company. And so it's kind of reminiscent of the Tempest. They're kind of very innocent of the world because they've been kept away from society. But the father, or he's not really the father, he's the one that actually kidnapped them, who's raised them as a father. His name's Belarius. He's always going on about how they're really princes, and that's why they're so noble, and that's why they're great hunters, and that's why they're so generous and high-minded and noble. So he's always going on about that they're like sort of naturally of high birth, and so like better character. So it's just a theme that goes through the whole play, right up to the very end. There's all this sort of playing around with it, and there's nothing. Shakespeare doesn't say anything definitive about it. It's just ironic and thought-provoking, basically. And so there's other tropes that happen in it, like there's so Imogen, one thing I couldn't remember where this came from, but so Posthumus goes to Italy, and this guy Giacomo bets him that Giacomo can go back and seduce his wife, and Posthumus says no way, her virtue is perfect, and that could never happen. So they bet on it, and Giacomo goes off, and he contrives this whole way of tricking. He hides in a trunk, and he gets all this evidence, so it'll seem like he knows he slept with her, and then he goes back and tells Posthumus, and Posthumus believes him, and so then he orders his servant Pisanio to kill Imogen. So first of all, I have heard that before. I think I heard it in Don Quixote. I think one of those times where they're sitting around telling stories. I think there's a story told there, and I think I can't remember where I heard this story before, where somebody bets that he can't seduce his wife, and then the wife winds up being seduced, or they trick him or whatever. He took that storyline, and that might have been even from Ovid's Metamorphosis, because I just read that earlier this year. It might have been in there, and I know that really influenced a lot of Shakespeare, and that Shakespeare, all the gods and goddesses and the Greek deities and all that sort of thing came from studying that, and that's what they used to study in grammar school. It's hard to believe. And I think maybe it was told in Don Quixote, and there's a real connection between Shakespeare and Don Quixote, which is very interesting. But anyway, so I'd heard that story before. And of course, Posthumus, for doing this, for making a bet on his wife's virtue, is an awful thing to do, right? And then to believe it, and then to tell his good and faithful servant to murder her for him. So it's kind of like, Snow White, where he takes her out into the woods. He takes her all the way to Wales, because part of the plot was Posthumus was going to meet her at this one place. Now the name is escaping me. Basically, maybe I'll see it in here. Where is it? Oh, I can't remember the name. It began with an M. Wait, it's something. Millwood something. Where did it go? Yeah, Milford Haven, Wales. Okay, that's the scene in Wales. So anyway, so she goes, and then he says, look, here's a letter from your husband, Posthumus, saying to murder you, and why. And so she freaks out about that. And then he says, but I'm not going to murder you. Instead, here are some clothes of mine, dress like a page, pretend you're a boy, and then there'll be coming through here is going to be this Roman diplomat that's been negotiating with the Britons, and just tell him that you need a job and he'll take you, right? So in the meantime, also in this place is where Belarius and the two sons that are really the king's sons are living. So and then there's this, it's just like Romeo and Juliet, there's this drug that the queen had that she thought would poison people, but the doctor didn't trust the queen, so he gave her something that would just make someone look like they were dead. And so she takes that, and she looks like she's dead. And then, it's so complicated. And then Cloten has discovered what's going on. So he forces Bassanio he dresses in Posthumus's clothing. And Bassanio shows him where he had left Imogen, or where he didn't tell him that he had taken Imogen there. He said, this is where Posthumus is supposed to be. And so Cloten goes, and he's awful. And he provokes a fight with one of the two sons, the two king's sons that nobody knows about, and he gets killed, and the son cuts off his head. And so, but Imogen sees somehow his body gets laid down next to Imogen, who they think is dead, and they're going to bury her. But for some reason, they go off. Imogen wakes up, sees the clothing on this beheaded body of clothing that was her husband's. And so she freaks out. She thinks he's dead. But then, before she has a chance to kill herself, like in Romeo and Juliet, the Roman diplomats come through. Lucius was the name. And he says, oh yeah, be my page boy. And then, anyway, so it's got all these elements from all these other tragedies. I feel like Shakespeare was just having fun. He took all these elements from all these tragedies, gave them a slightly different twist, wound them all together, and then instead of having a sad ending, it's a happy ending. So I enjoyed reading it. I really enjoyed it a lot. I still think the funniest thing is that Posthumus is not a great person. I don't think, even though Imogen, who is like virtue, and she's the best of them all. She and Pisanio are the two best. Um, you know, she's in love with him, but I think that she's better than he is. He has not proven himself in this play. He does not prove himself to be a good person. So, yeah, so it was interesting, and I enjoyed it. So that is my summing up of Cymbeline for Shake-Tember. And now I'm going to move on to other things, but I will continue to watch Shake-Tember videos because I do enjoy Shake-Tember so much. All right, well, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you later. Happy reading.